Good afternoon, guys. So I'm trying something a little bit different today. I'm going to kind of do a speed run through of the informative lecture. So if there are a couple things that perhaps you missed in class, this will give you an opportunity to get a just real quick overview. Alright, so the whole point of today's lecture was to get you guys prepared and thinking about what you're going to do for the informative speech. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to go over the basic parts of the informative speech and talk about the requirements and give you some hints and helpful suggestions that will hopefully prepare you to give excellent speeches when we start doing these the week after next. And if that works, we'll continue. Alright, so a basic overview of what is expected. First off, the course has a theme, which is crossing borders, so you have to make sure whatever topics you choose for your informative speech, they need to fall under the broad category of an immigration-related issue. Now, I'm open to you guys doing a lot of different things. It doesn't necessarily have to be U.S.-Mexico border stuff, but it has to do something with immigration somewhere in the world. So you can check out stuff with that and start thinking of some ideas. If your topic is boring, then you're going to lose points. So try to get creative and feel free to email me and run ideas by me. Overall, the speech should last about 6 to 7 minutes. Like last time, if you're in that 6 to 7 range, no problem. If you're significantly short, I'm going to take a point off for every 30 seconds, and I'm going to have our time key for the day cut you off at 7 minutes and 30 seconds. So don't let that happen and not be done with your speech. This is the first assignment you guys can do that's going to require some outside resources. So you want to shoot for a minimum of 4 scholarly sources. And when we get to that section, I'll explain that in more depth, that you're probably going to want more than that. Also, this requires that you guys have some visual aids for this. This actual packet refers to a PowerPoint presentation, but we're just going to use that digital visual aids to present imagery. And again, I'll talk to that in a little bit. Also, PowerPoint sucks, so we're going to use Google Docs so we don't have to wait for Microsoft to quit being a fail. Moving on. Alright, very basic. First off, you're going to have to do an outline this time. Last time you did a manuscript for your speech, which means that you actually typed it out word for word. This time, not the case. I want a full sentence outline showing your major points and giving me your sources from the speech. However, I do not want a word-for-word manuscript for the entire speech. If you do that, I will give you a 0 on your outline. So make sure that it is an outline and not a manuscript. The day that you speak, you'll need to upload it to the Dropbox. Just like last time, we've got the Dropbox set up on Vista. Please make sure that it goes in the right Dropbox. There is a draft that you'll be turning in next week to the draft Dropbox. The final version, the day of your speech, needs to go into the nice, pretty, colorful one like you see right there. The other thing is APA format is going to be super strict on this. Use the template. If you're not sure about something, refer to the APA style guide, go to the OWL site, or just email me and run it by me and I'll be glad to give you some feedback. You have to cite sources in the speech. This will need to be happened both in your outline and verbally throughout the course of your speech. Alright, so let's look at the basic structure of an informative speech. As you can see, up here at the top we have the thesis, which is actually the introduction of your speech. Once you get past the thesis, you're going to move into a series of main points, and underneath each of those main points, you're going to have some subpoints that helps build the structure together. Once you all do all this, you'll summarize everything you talk about, conclude strong, and that's all there is to it. However, let's go a little more in depth than that. Alright, so let's talk about the introduction. The introduction basically has 5 major parts. First, an attention getter, which you guys should already be somewhat familiar with. A statement establishing your credibility. Some sort of stylistic technique used to adapt your content to your audience. And ultimately, you should conclude with a thesis statement as you transition into the body of your speech. Let's break that down. So, this was a bit of a problem in our storytelling speeches, and I think it's something that we can improve upon as we move into our informative and persuasive speeches. You want to have a creative attention getter. Now, the attention getter is designed to intrigue your audience members and motivate them to listen to you effectively for the entirety of your speech. There are all kinds of different possibilities for attention-getting devices. Some of the more common things that I've seen include telling a story, asking rhetorical questions, bringing in a famous quotation. Now, Any of these devices could be effective, but it's important that you spend some time coming up with a strategy and creating and practicing this attention getter so that it actually grabs the attention of your audience. I guess most importantly thing to keep in mind is that an attention getter should create curiosity in the minds of your listeners and kind of leaving them on the edge wanting some more. When you word your attention getter, you want to make sure that it's refined and that you've practiced it a lot. And also, keep in mind the mood/tone of your speech. I mean, if you have a really intense, depressing speech, probably don't want to come across with a really goofy attention getter because then that would be appropriate. Use something that makes sense based on your content. Yeah, and that's the gist of that. All right, let's go ahead and move on. The next thing that we want to talk about is audience adaptation. And this is definitely something that was lacking a little bit in our storytelling that we can improve upon. So, in the introduction to speech, you need to start to find ways to adapt your speech to your audience. Over the last few weeks, we've been doing some questions of the day, trying to get an idea of your audience, but we still don't know each other very well, so this can be kind of difficult. What you want to do is find ways to tell your audience why the topic is important to them. To accomplish this, you need to start to think about who your audience is. Find out who they are and what's important to them, and perhaps what biases and types of issues appeal to them. In the context of your class, you kind of get some audience analysis by just knowing the fact that this is a class. For example, most of your listeners, college students, they're young, they live in California. You can probably make some guesses that they put some value on education, probably not very loaded with money. Those kind of things can be helpful when adapting messages to your audience. So as you're researching and writing your speak, take notes and references on issues that you think would be important to your audience. Try to include statements about aspects of your speech that will be of special interest to the audience in the introduction. By doing this, you'll give your audience some specific things to which they can identify. Audience adaptation should happen throughout the entirety of the speech, but if you do it really well on the attention getter, it's going to set you up for success as you move on. There's a couple things that I mentioned here, referencing to the occasion, and also referring to previous speakers. If you know that there's something specific coming up that your audience can do, perhaps a symposium on immigration issues or something like that, you may want to mention that just so that there's more connection with your issue. If a specific holiday is coming up, you're going to talk about that. That's related to the immigration issue, or perhaps a court case is coming to trial. Those are occasions that can help bring your audience in. The other thing that you can do, and this is kind of has to happen on the fly, so it's hard, but if you can reference a previous speaker that's going on that day, you can bring their topic in. This may even be an opportunity for you to talk to the people that are scheduled to go on that same day and maybe find ways to kind of play off each other. All those things are effective and bring your audience into the speech. Okay. The next thing that you need in an introduction is a credibility statement. The importance of the credibility statement is that you will need to establish yourself as a credible source for your audience. Some things that you can do through this are explain special knowledge that you have. You can talk about the research that you've done. Keep in mind you should have done a lot of research for this, so those are definitely things you can drop. Bring in personal experience and stories. Why are you specifically qualified to talk about this? If you've got something in your background that you feel would contribute to this, by all means, talk about it. Kind of going back to Aristotle. In the original Aristotelian sense, Aristotle said that credibility, or what was called ethos, let's go in the water bottle, consists of creating goodwill and moral character. Your goal is to create the feeling that you possess these qualities as you give your speech. So trying to find ways to do that will be beneficial as you move forward. All right. Finally, having done this, it's time to get to your thesis statement. The thesis statement is probably the most crucial part of setting up your speech. To do a statement correctly, it is critical that you clearly communicate what your topic and purpose is to the audience. You want to be sure that the statement is clear, concise, and easy to remember. When you deliver the statement, try to use nonverbals to indicate and illustrate why what you're saying is important and so that the thesis clearly stands out amongst everything else that happens in the introduction. All right, so at this point, you've set up your introduction, and it's time to move into the body of your speech. So I want to talk a little bit about transitory statements or transition statements. As you move from main section to main section of your speech, it's important to use statements that illustrate that that's happening. We call these transition statements. So the example that I have here is pretty simple. Now that I've told you about main point 1, let's move on to main point 2. If you want to score in the creative category, though, you should try to come up with something a little more creative than that. The point of this is that it gives a structure to your speech, and it ties the different sections of your speech together. While we're on this topic, let's talk a little bit about movement over the course of the speech. So if you look at the diagram here, you can see that there are different places in the front of the room where you should walk as you give your speech. And I've talked a little bit about the speaker's triangle in this class, but hopefully this will make it clear. So when you're starting, you want to go ahead and cruise up here and start in the middle of the classroom. And you should give the entirety of your introduction by standing at this point. As you say that transition statement, all right, so let's go ahead and start by talking about this first main point. Go ahead and take a few steps as you say that statement and walk to main point 1. At this point, you're going to talk about that main part of your speech. Once you've concluded talking about that part, again, go ahead and walk. Now that we've talked about point 1, let's talk about main point 2. Talk about main point 2, standing in that spot. All right, now that we talked about main point 2, let's walk back on over and talk about main point 3. Now that we've talked about main point 3, let's wrap things up. Walk up to the top, give your conclusion and summary, and then take a step forward and make that final point with emphasis. All the parts of it may be a little more clear in a minute, but hopefully that explains the speaker triangle a little bit better. All right, so we got our transition statements.